everybody. Welcome back to my channel and happy Harloween. This is the 4th year we've done Harloween, and as you know, it is one of my favorite times of the year, if not the favorite time of the year. The favorite time of the year for me. And I know a lot of you feel the same because for the past 12 months since last Harloween finished up, I always see comments that you all can't wait for next Harloween, and it's finally here. I have a lot of great stuff planned for you this month. I actually think that this is going to be my favorite Harloween, maybe even the best one yet. I don't know. You guys let me know at the end of the month. This month allows us to transition a little bit away from the real world and journey into the land of the spooky, the supernatural, the unbelievable even. I do have some traditional true crime videos for you this month, as is the case with today's video. But of course, every single one of these cases still ties back to Halloween in some way and definitely have an eerie twist to them. Today's case, for instance, sends a chill up my spine, even though I've been with it for several weeks by now. It still creeps me out and makes me feel like this shit just ain't right in the world. However, for a good portion of Halloween, I really just want us to have fun and to forget. There's so much bad stuff going on in the world right now. I could list it all and be like, oh, give examples of all the bad stuff that's happening. But honestly, it would just be depressing. And I think sometimes we feel guilty for attempting to mentally escape from all of that. I know I do. But we shouldn't, right? Because in order to keep fighting for a better world, in order to live another day and fight another day, we need to be strong and not emotionally beat to a pulp, right? We need a little break. So escape with me a little bit this month. I'm going to bring you all over the world. We're going to learn things. We're going to be shocked and shook. We're going to laugh a lot, especially one of these videos, man. I was researching it on the plane just last week, and I was laughing out loud on the plane, and I had my headphones in, so I didn't realize. And then my husband was like, people are looking at you because I was laughing. And it's complicated. You'll see when we get there why I was laughing. And, we are going to allow the spirit and magic of Harloween to transport us away from all of this. I'm so pumped. I know I'm not all Halloweened up right now. I know I'm not all decked out in Halloween attire right now. Well, technically I'm recording this on September 29th, so it's not even October yet. So, it's going to take me a second, but this is my transition look, right? I've got my purple ghost nails. They have little ghosts on them. Green is definitely a Halloween color. And today for my eye look, I used the ColourPop Witching Hour palette, the Hocus Pocus one. So I got some greens in there, I got some purples. And so just consider this my transition to Halloween look, which means by the end of the month, I should be sitting in front of you in straight witch hat and robes, Hogwarts style. Hold me accountable. At the end of this month, Hermione Granger should be sitting in front of you. And of course, the Halloween decorations have returned for the month of October. And that's a joke because I never took them down from last Halloween. It was an easy setup this year. Okay, so before we dive into today's video, into today's case, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. If you are like me and you love documentaries the way I do, and I know you do, you've probably already exhausted most of your documentary options on streaming platforms. Maybe you've even watched some of them twice, and you are tempted now to watch that garbage Netflix show called Dahmer because, we need dramatic retellings of serial killer stories. That's what we need. So you're probably running out of legitimate documentaries to watch. That's why you should try Magellan TV, a documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers. Magellan TV has more true crime documentaries than any other platform, and every week they add 15 to 20 hours of new content, so you'll never run out of something to watch. And it's very fun because you can just go into what's new this week section, and there's always tons of stuff in there that I want to watch. And check this out. Since it's spooky season, since it is the most wonderful time of the year, I have a really cool recommendation for you, and I urge you to go and watch it immediately. watch this first, of course, and then go watch Vampire Skeletons on Magellan TV. A new archaeological find reveals a disturbing truth behind the legend of the vampire. Were mutilated bodies in an ancient Irish grave associated with political terrorism or a ritual killing performed by a vampire? This film, which is an easy 45 minutes, very quick watch. I mean, it feels like it goes by in 5 minutes because it's so entertaining, but it's going to take you back hundreds to thousands of years before the creation of our first vampire, Dracula, and it looks into the darkest depths of humanity's earliest fear of the undead. I'm actually super interested in vampires, vampire lore, the history of how the legend of the vampire came to be. You guys probably know that if you've been with me for a while. Let me know if you want a video on that, because nothing would please me more. But I really enjoyed this documentary, and I think that even if you aren't into vampires, or you pretend you're not, because who isn't into vampires? Even if you're not into vampires, you'd still get a lot out of this, because it's very entertaining and educational. Magellan TV is completely ad-free and can be watched anytime, anywhere on your television, cell phone, tablet, or laptop. It's also compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, and iOS. And they don't just have true crime content, they have amazing history, science, nature, and travel documentaries that will keep you entertained and educated for hours. With an annual membership of just $59.98 a year, you'll only pay $4.99 a month for over 3,500 hours worth of amazing documentaries. And if you click the link in my description box, you can try Magellan TV out for yourself for 1 month free, no strings attached, no contracts to sign. You can cancel anytime you want, but I don't think you're going to want to, because it's pretty great. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. When I think of the Candyman, I'm transported back to an age when I was certainly far too young to watch truly terrifying horror movies. I was maybe 12 when I watched the 1992 film Candyman, and I'll never forget it. And I'll never forget the villain, an angry spirit, a violent, angry spirit with a hook for a hand. And they called him the Candyman because, allegedly, when the smell of cotton candy hits your nose, you'll know that the Candyman is close by, and then you will want to get the hell out of there. Now, as an adult, I can see the deeper meaning in the movie, because the reason the Candyman smelled like cotton candy was because he had been tortured in his life. His right hand had been cut off by an angry mob, and he'd been smeared with honeycomb so that a swarm of bees would sting him to death. As someone who is allergic to bees, that was also unsettling, to say the least. One bee would have thrown me for a loop, but the amount of bees that the Candyman had on him. The Candyman was, in life, a normal man, right? He had dreams, skills, he loved, he lost. Unfortunately, he was a black man, the son of a slave born in the late 1800s who fell in love with a white woman. Her father sent a mob after him to torture him, to murder him. Looking at it that way, maybe we can understand why the Candyman may be a bit angry, maybe a little pissed off, and why he may be looking to take that anger out on someone. And once you get that full picture, it's actually a very sad story. If not for circumstances out of his control, the Candyman would have lived a normal life, a happy life even. It's Halloween time and we see monsters everywhere we look. But often, once you peer underneath the surface, we can see that these people weren't born monsters. Frankenstein's monster was denied the basic human needs of companionship and acceptance. He was shunned and abandoned by a society because of something out of his control, which was the way he looked. Jason Voorhees, he was just a happy-go-lucky kid at camp thinking he was going to have the best summer of his life when he was bullied by the other campers for no other reason than kids are cruel. These notorious horror figures become less scary when we understand a little bit about how the monster was made. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there, because everything becomes less scary when you learn about it, when you get close enough to it to understand it. In my opinion, the truly terrifying monsters are not on our television screens or in our movie theaters, but walking among us. And often, with these real-life monsters, taking a peek under the surface gives no explanation or justification for what they would become and what they would go on to do. With the movies, everything's wrapped up neatly. You see the backstory, you see the context, you see the why and the motive and the plot. But with these real life monsters, sometimes you never know why they did it, or you never understand how they could have done what they did. And that brings us to the real life Candyman. The year was 1974, and the place was Houston, Texas. 32-year-old Ronald Clark O'Brien lived with his wife, Daneen, and their 2 children, 5-year-old Elizabeth and 8-year-old Timothy, in Deer Park, a middle-class Houston suburb. Ronald O'Brien was described as being a big guy, tall and broad, but when he spoke softly in a surprisingly high-pitched voice for a guy of his size and stature, and this would sometimes throw people off. Ronald was also considered to be a model citizen, a pillar of his community, a good Christian man, and an above-average father. He worked as an optician at Texas State Optical. He served as the deacon at the Second Baptist Church, where he and his family attended services regularly, where he also sang in the church choir and oversaw the parochial bus program. Ronald was a busy guy, and obviously he was going to be usually tired when he got home from work in the evenings. So it was a bit out of character when he offered to take his 2 children out trick-or-treating on Halloween night in 1974. And he not only offered, but he seemed very excited about it. Ronald O'Brien, his wife Daneen, and their 2 children, Elizabeth and Timmy, they all went to the home of Jim Bates that night for a lovely dinner of pork roast before hitting the streets for a fun night of trick-or-treating. Now, Jim Bates and his family, they attended the same church that the O'Briens attended, and they also had 2 young children, 11-year-old Kimberly and 9-year-old Mark, who Elizabeth and Timmy knew and who they were friendly with. Even better, Jim Bates and his family lived in the Bowling Green neighborhood of Pasadena, a neighborhood that was pretty well off and where Ronald O'Brien felt his kids would have the best chances of getting the good candy bars. And I totally understand this because we've always done this. We will go and drive to the neighborhoods with the biggest houses. I mean, the 3-car garages. When you got a 3-car garage, it's on. You're going to have big candy bars. You're going to have the full-size ones, not the fun-size ones. You're going to have the full-sized candy bars. I'm talking the Reese's peanut butter cups with the 3 peanut butter cups in there, the long one, not the fun-sized one. And why are they called fun-size? Because we all know more candy is more fun than less candy. So in fact, the full-sized candy bars should be labeled fun size, but I digress. So Ronald O'Brien and his family and Jim Bates and his family, they all have pork roast and lima beans. It was a good dinner, and when everyone was finished eating, the wives began clearing the table and chatting, and Jim Bates grabbed a few flashlights and umbrellas, and he even loaned his buddy Ronald a raincoat, since the drizzle outside showed no sign of letting up. The 2 men and their children, 4 children in total, all headed out and began going door to door. Within 10 minutes or so, the rain began to fall at a faster pace, and Jim's 11-year-old daughter, Kimberly, she said, "I'm out. I'm not going to walk around these streets getting poured on." She called it a night, and she went home where it was dry and warm. But the fathers and the rest of the kids continued on, trying to get a few more houses in before the downpour. Now, the rain didn't seem to be bothering the younger children. It never does. They continued screeching in excitement as they rang doorbell after doorbell, yelling "trick or treat" as each door swung open to reveal its residents holding bowls of brightly wrapped candy. But there was no answer at the door of one brown house, and after ringing the doorbell and bouncing up and down on the front steps for a few moments, the 3 kids dashed off to the next house. Jim Bates watched with a smile on his face. The people who lived in that brown house, they were probably out of town, or maybe they were out of candy, or maybe they just called it a night early, not even wanting to open the door into this rainy night. If Jim was being honest, he felt the same. He'd rather be toasty and warm in his living room right now than trudging around in the wet streets. But then again, Jim Bates knew, as most parents do, that Halloween, it's part of what makes childhood so magical, and he could sacrifice a bit of his comfort for an hour or so in exchange for the wonderful memories his children would carry with them into adulthood. Jim Bates knew that no one had answered the door at that brown house, but as he followed the children down the street, his buddy, Ronald O'Brien, who had hung back a little bit, he jogged up to him, holding 5 giant purple and white tubes in his hand, swishing them around in the air like riding crops. "You must have rich neighbors," Ronald shouted as he got closer, beaming from ear to ear. "Look what they're giving out." The tubes he was holding were giant-sized pixie sticks, 22 inches of sugar and food coloring, the holy grail for any young trick-or-treater. Ronald O'Brien ran ahead towards the kids, holding the pixie sticks high over his head and yelling, "Who wants them?" And of course, all the kids wanted them. Their pixie sticks. Giant pixie sticks. Jim Bates glanced over his shoulder at the brown house, which sat dark and quiet, almost as if the walls were holding their breath. It didn't look like anyone was home, but maybe the kids ringing the doorbell insistently had brought someone to the door. It was a good thing Ronald had been hanging back, or they might have missed those giant pixie sticks. The damp little group of fathers and children only made it to a few more houses, and Ronald and Jim had to actually fill their pockets with candy because the candy was getting wet inside the soggy trick-or-treat bags. So they all turned back and headed towards the Bates house. The kids ran inside, but Ronald excused himself briefly because he said he wanted to get some lollipops out of his car before going in the house. Ronald was back inside, though, within a few minutes, and all 4 kids were chattering excitedly and examining their candy hauls. Ronald pulled out the pixie sticks that he'd been keeping dry in the pockets of his raincoat, and he gave one to each child, along with some lollipops he'd retrieved from his car. There was 1 pixie stick left over, because remember, Ronald had gotten 5 from the generous Bowling Green resident in the brown house, and there was 4 kids altogether. There was Ronald O'Brien's 2 kids, and then Jim Bates' 2 kids. But there would only be 1 pixie stick left over for just a short time, because as Ronald was handing them out to the kids, the doorbell of the Bates home rang, and Ronald went to answer it, finding a group of young trick-or-treaters on the front porch with their bags open. 10-year-old Whitney Parker was one of those children, and he actually knew Ronald O'Brien from church. Whitney said that Ronald gave each of the trick-or-treaters a handful of bubble gum, and then he held up 1 giant pixie stick. He held it up real high, and he asked, "Who wants this?" All the kids began hopping up and down and raising their hands. "We do, we do." Of course, what kid wouldn't want a giant straw filled with sugar? But 10-year-old Whitney Parker held his hand up the highest, and he yelled out to Ronald, "I go to your church," causing Ronald to turn to the young boy with a smile and drop the remaining pixie stick into his open bag. Ronald O'Brien and his little family said their goodbyes to the Bates and headed to their modest home at 746 Parktown in Deer Park. Elizabeth and Timmy got into their pajamas and hopped into bed because, after all, it was a school night and Timmy was a 3rd grader at Carpenter Elementary School. But Ronald wasn't so strict that he wouldn't let his kids have any fun, so he told them that they could each choose 1 piece of Halloween candy that they could eat that night. Later, a distraught Ronald explained that his son, 8-year-old Timmy, had chosen the giant pixie stick. Ronald said that Timmy got the candy straw open, but the sugar inside was too thick and clumped up, most likely from the moisture in the air. So Ronald had to help by taking the plastic straw and rolling it between his palms to break up the sugar clumps. Ronald helped little Timmy even further by pouring the candy directly into his mouth for him. But Timmy made a face. "The sugar tastes weird," he told his father. "It was too bitter. He didn't really like it." Ronald O'Brien, being the dedicated and above-average father that he was known to be, he couldn't let this stand, not with the 1 Halloween candy piece chosen. So Ronald went to the kitchen and poured his son a glass of Kool-Aid so that Timmy could keep eating the candy. Washing it down with the sweet and refreshing Kool-Aid would make it taste less bitter. Within an hour after consuming his 1 special piece of Halloween candy, 8-year-old Timmy O'Brien would be dead. Bill Lanier was a detective with the Pasadena Police Department. He had just been promoted 6 months earlier, and when he arrived at Southmore Hospital, Timmy O'Brien was already gone, and all Bill could do was interview the remaining family members. Ronald O'Brien walked the detective through the events of that evening. He told Bill Lanier about trick-or-treating, he told him about Timmy eating the pixie stick, and he told him about tucking his son into bed once the candy was finished. That was when things went wrong, horribly wrong. Ronald O'Brien said, quote, 30 seconds after I left Tim's room, I heard him cry to me, Daddy, Daddy, my stomach hurts. He was in the bathroom, convulsing, vomiting, and gasping, and then suddenly he went limp. End quote. Ronald had then called an ambulance, and Timmy had been rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was foaming at the mouth. It was like he couldn't breathe, and then he was gone. Bill Lanier didn't know it then, but this was going to be his first murder investigation as a detective. But initially, there was nothing suspicious about Ronald O'Brien, the big guy with the soft voice. Bill Lanier said, quote, he had a real hangdog look. He wasn't crying or bawling or anything, but there was no reason to believe he was involved. End quote. Meanwhile, at the morgue, the medical examiner was in the process of performing an autopsy on Timmy O'Brien when he recognized the strong smell of bitter almonds emanating from Timmy's mouth, and the medical examiner knew what that meant. He knew that this was the telltale sign of cyanide poisoning. A full autopsy later confirmed that 8-year-old Timmy had consumed enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 or 3 grown men. Potassium cyanide is a highly toxic chemical that interrupts the body's ability to use oxygen. It's colorless and granular, and it looks very much like sugar. And death by cyanide is actual torture. It is not pleasant. It is not fast. It is not one of those you just go softly into that dark night. It is very, very bad. If you remember from our series on Jim Jones and the People's Temple, this was the substance that was placed into grape Flavor Aid, and then Jim Jones forced his entire congregation to drink it. 918 people died. 276 of them were children. I will link that series in the description box if you haven't seen it yet and you want to check it out. It is quite disturbing. So when it was discovered that Timmy O'Brien had died from cyanide poisoning, the police knew that it could only have come from that pixie stick. That was the last thing he ate, and they sprung into action. Luckily, the authorities were able to retrieve the other 4 pixie sticks. Timmy's 5-year-old sister Elizabeth had one, both of the Bates children had one, and little Whitney Parker was found in bed, asleep, clutching his giant pixie stick in his hands. It turned out that the plastic straws, which would usually be sealed with heat, they'd been opened, tampered with, and then stapled back together. Whitney had been unable to get his open because the staple was too hard to pry apart with Whitney's little boy hands, and this, it turned out, saved his life. Because if Whitney Parker had been able to get that pixie stick open that night, or if he'd gotten up out of bed and gotten scissors or a knife or something and cut it open, he would also be dead. Because it was discovered that some sick individual had replaced the top 2 inches of the sugary snack with cyanide granules. And that's why little Timmy O'Brien had said, this tastes bitter. Because basically there wasn't even any sugar in what he got, in what he ate. It was just the cyanide at the top. The police knew this had not been an accident or a fluke. Some freak, some Halloween psychopath was targeting children and using this very fun and childlike holiday to do it. The police immediately began going door to door in the Pasadena neighborhood where the O'Briens and the Bates had been trick-or-treating, and they confiscated candy from each and every home. They also put the word out that if anyone had candy that looked suspicious or strange, or as if it had been tampered with, they should bring it to the police station. By the next day, an entire room at the station was filled with Halloween candy. However, there weren't a lot of pixie sticks in the mix, especially those big giant pixie sticks. In fact, it seemed the only giant pixie sticks that had been given out that night had gone to children either in Ronald O'Brien's trick-or-treating group or connected to Ronald O'Brien and Jim Bates in some way, such as little Whitney Parker, who had gotten his pixie stick from Ronald while he was trick-or-treating. Pasadena detective David Mulligan was confused as to why only this handful of kids had this candy and why this candy would have been given out in general, saying, quote, "It's a rather expensive type of candy to be giving out at Halloween," end quote. Now, just for the record, normal pixie sticks were not actually that expensive, but the giant ones were a little bit pricey, and honestly, as a responsible adult, it probably wouldn't be something you'd be giving out at Halloween because they're big, they hold a lot of sugar, and you really wouldn't want kids to consume that all in one sitting. But the interesting thing, fun fact, about pixie sticks, they initially started off as a drink mixture, almost like a Kool-Aid, but parents found that their kids were like eating the powder and not mixing it with water, so they made it into pixie sticks, and pixie sticks actually would sort of evolve and transition into one of my favorite guilty pleasure candies that I only allow myself to have once or twice a year, and that is Fun Dip. I love Fun Dip. Fun Dip is basically just colored sugar, and then you dip a sugar stick into the sugar and get more sugar on your sugar stick and then eat it, and then, probably get diabetes. But it was almost as if whoever had chosen pixie sticks knew the addictive quality of sugar, or at least the addictive quality of candy to kids. These giant pixie sticks were one candy that these kids would not be able to ignore. That at the end of the day, if they had to choose one thing to eat, they were going to be zeroing in on that pixie stick. And believe me, I have kids. I know they would have zeroed in on that pixie stick, which is terrifying. Law enforcement immediately set out to try and track down which house the candy had come from. And it shouldn't have been hard, right? Because Ronald and Jim had only brought the kids down 2, maybe 3 streets. And they'd only been on 2 streets before the pixie sticks. So Ronald told the police that it had been a brown house on either Citation or Donerail Drive. And he was shocked. He was like out of his mind to find out that someone was out there poisoning innocent kids. Ronald O'Brien, shaking his head in disgust, told a reporter, quote, "It's so disheartening to think there wasn't more we could do. We thought we were being so careful. We had even wondered if we should go out at all this year," end quote. Ronald O'Brien told the police that it was tough to identify where the poisoned candy had come from, It had been dark, he wasn't familiar with the area, and he hadn't even really seen the person who gave it to him. All he could remember was that he'd seen an arm stretching out from the open door, holding the candy straws. That same night, Halloween night, the police brought Ronald out in the police cars to drive around these streets and see if he could identify the house. But he really couldn't do it that night. So the police gave him a few days and brought him back to this area during the day. And at that time, Ronald O'Brien was able to identify the exact house. He pointed to 4112 Donerail Drive, and even better, the man who had given him the candy was standing on the front lawn of this home when Ronald and the police drove by. Even though previously Ronald had claimed that he hadn't seen the person who gave him the candy, he'd just seen the arm. This man and the owner of the brown house was Courtney Melvin. He worked at Houston's William Hobby P. Airport, and the police went to his job and they arrested him in front of everybody. With the evil poisoner in custody, the residents of Houston, Texas could breathe easy again. But then it all began to fall apart. Courtney Melvin had an alibi, an airtight alibi. He was a shift supervisor at the airport, and he worked the late shift. And on the evening of October 31st, he'd been at work until 11 p.m., and at least 24 people were able to confirm that. In fact, when he got arrested, all the people standing around were like, "What's going on? This can't be for the Halloween night thing because he was here all night." Now, this was a problem, not for Courtney Melvin, but for Timothy O'Brien's father, Ronald O'Brien, because Ronald had insisted that Melvin was the person who had handed him the poisoned pixie sticks. He'd identified him. And this caused the police to look a bit closer at Ronald, who seemed, on the surface, to be a good Christian man who didn't have so much as a parking ticket, definitely no criminal record, but who also wasn't necessarily acting the way a grieving father should be acting. Lieutenant Bess of the Deer Park Police said, quote, "You just knew something was wrong. I was always looking for his emotions. He seemed too cool, calm, and collected for a parent who had just lost a child." End quote. And then the phone calls started to come in. Calls from people who had heard about what had happened, who'd had interactions with Ronald O'Brien either before his son died or after, and these people were feeling that something was just not making sense about his version of events. One by one, like puzzle pieces snugly fitting together, each new piece of information created a picture and painted a horrifying reality. On Monday, November 4th, the Pasadena police received a chilling phone call from Robert Ballo Jr., an insurance agent in Galena Park. Robert Ballo Jr. claimed that Ronald O'Brien had called him late one night requesting insurance policies on both of his young children. But it was strange because Ronald had said that he wanted to insure the lives of his children for $20,000 each, and the insurance agent had let Ronald know that for the same price he could buy policies that only had a current face value of $5,000, but that would go up to $25,000 when Timmy and Elizabeth turned 23, and there would also be larger cash returns in their adult years. Now, even though this all made a lot of sense, and, Robert Ballo Jr. knew what he was talking about because this is his job, Ronald O'Brien insisted on the higher, immediate policies. Can you say red flags? Yes. This was just weeks before Halloween, and Ronald purchased the two $20,000 policies on both his son and his daughter. And then the police found out that the previous January he had taken out two $10,000 life insurance policies on his children, meaning that if one or both of them died, Ronald O'Brien would stand to gain quite a bit of money, which, as it turns out, he needed badly because Ronald was deep in debt. And he also didn't seem to be able to hold a job. In a 10-year period, Ronald had been employed by 21 different companies, and he'd been fired from each one of them for negligence or fraudulent behavior. And at the time of his son's death, Ronald was about to get fired again by his current employer, Texas State Optical, located in Meyerland Plaza in Houston, because the owners suspected that he was stealing money. Dr. Joe Blackburn, an optometrist who had formerly worked with O'Brien, he said that Ronald was always talking about his debts, and he was adding up his debts on an adding machine, which I think is a calculator, but maybe it's also one of those electronic fancy adding machines that accountants use. But Ronald was always adding up his debts and his bills, and he said he had a plan to pay them off, and then he was also going to buy a house. He had all of these plans for what he would do when he paid off all of these debts, but there's a lot of debts. The police found a piece of adding machine tape where Ronald had written the amount of all his bills, and it happened to be almost the same amount as what he stood to gain in the event that both his son, Timmy, and his daughter, Elizabeth, died. Ronald O'Brien was in a bad financial position. He had defaulted on several bank loans. His car was about to get repossessed just the following month, and he owed several $1,000s to a credit union and a finance company and the United States government. The massive hole that he had dug was getting deeper, as Ronald was only bringing home $150 a week, which barely covered food and rent, so he wasn't making a dent in his debts. When the police sat down with Ronald's wife, Daneen, and they told her what they had discovered, she didn't necessarily look shocked. She looked as if she had heard something she'd suspected the whole time. She put her face in her hands and cried. And she told the detectives that she had known about the $10,000 insurance policies taken out on her children's lives back in January. And she and her husband had actually fought about it because they were barely making ends meet. They couldn't even pay their electric bill. Yet Ronald O'Brien insisted on paying $108 a month for life insurance policies on their small children. It hadn't made any sense to her then, but it did now. I mean, of all the people in the world, you can probably put off life insurance plans for children. Some people look at it as a little nest egg for their children, something that they can carry with them into adulthood and already have built up. And that's true. But if you're struggling and you can't keep food in the refrigerator and you can't keep your lights on in your house, I think your children need those immediate concerns kind of answered and handled. And the life insurance can be put off until you're in a better place. So, I mean, even families today would struggle to make $108 a month life insurance payments. That was very suspicious. I guess I don't know why people didn't see all of those red flags sooner, because I tell you what, if it was me and my husband was insisting we take out life insurance policies on our kids and we were broke, I'd be like, why does this seem wrong? Why does this seem that, it's not adding up? Should we get your adding machine? Are you planning to kill our children for the money? Because that's what it seems like. Daneen O'Brien told the police that she had no knowledge of these newer and higher life insurance policies that Ronald had purchased just weeks before Timmy's death. Timmy O'Brien died on a Thursday night, and by 9 a.m. the next day, Ronald was calling to cash in on those life insurance policies, according to both Robert Ballo Jr. and Eugene Shepard, a cashier at the Pasadena bank where Ronald had purchased the first life insurance policies. And the fact that he was ready to get that money, literally not even 24 hours after his son died, the next morning, they were like, something's off. Something is not right. I mean, they should have felt that way originally, but the fact that they felt this way now and decided to call the police, we can appreciate them for that. At least they didn't say, that's none of my business and move on with their lives, as so many people have and do. And it was reported that Ronald O'Brien was behaving very strangely on the day and the evening of his son's funeral. His brother-in-law, John Tucker Jr., rode with the O'Brien family to the cemetery to bury Timmy. And he claimed that Ronald had a vision as they were driving, a vision in which God revealed to him the real house where the poisoned candy had come from. Ronald claimed that in this vision, he could see the house and the hand of a man, the rough hand of a working man. And in that extended, calloused palm, there laid 5 purple and white pixie sticks. I'm not sure what this vision is doing for anybody at this point, but Ronald had a vision from God. John Tucker also claimed that Ronald expressed a ton of interest in any news coverage about Timmy's death, which, of course, during that time, this was shocking. It's shocking now, but when it happens in your community, it's going to be covered a lot in the news. And Ronald O'Brien was always watching the news and always talking to reporters. This is something about Ronald O'Brien that he kind of holds on to until the end of his life. He loves the spotlight. He loves the media. After Timmy's funeral, Ronald O'Brien tried to convince everyone in his family to stay up late and watch the evening news because there was some coverage about Timmy and the funeral, and also because Ronald had performed a hymn in church. And while he was doing this, he interjected his son's name into various places of the song or the hymn as he sang, and kind of, I guess, was just being a ham about it. Like that one dad in the Paradise Lost, the West Memphis 3 documentary, who got up and he was in a recording studio and making these Christian songs about his stepson and what happened. And, was it Byers? I think it might have been Byers who was doing it. But let me know in the comments because I know you all know what I'm talking about. So apparently there had been cameras in the church when Ronald O'Brien performed this amazing hymn, and footage of this was supposed to be playing on the news that night, and he wanted everyone to watch it. The specific hymn that he sang spoke of the peace that would be offered by the assurance of eternal life in heaven. And when he finished, Ronald spoke about his son, saying, quote, "He was all boy. He loved football, basketball, anything. He never met a stranger, but but I have my peace in knowing that Tim is in heaven now, end quote. Now, the night of Timmy's funeral, Ronald's family fell asleep. Obviously, it was an emotionally draining day. They are not trying to stay up late and watch the news. So Ronald actually stayed up to watch the news alone. And the next morning at breakfast, he excitedly talked to his family about the news segment and what they had said about Timmy and what they had said about him and things like that. And that same day, the day after Timmy's funeral, Ronald's brother-in-law, John Tucker Jr., he found himself pulled into a very strange conversation with the supposedly grieving father. John Tucker claimed that Ronald was discussing what he was going to do with the insurance money that he expected to get from Timmy's death. Later in court, John Tucker Jr. testified, saying, quote, "He asked me a question that went like this. John, you know I'll be getting some insurance money from Tim's death. Do you think I should pay off bills or make a down payment on a house?" End quote. And Ronald O'Brien's sister-in-law also would testify, saying that he had also mentioned going on vacation with the money, that, they deserved it because of the loss and their grieving and how much they were going through. Like, they deserved to take a break and go away with this money from his son's death. Ronald's brother-in-law, John Tucker, he said he quickly changed the subject because he personally found the conversation to be repugnant. Ronald's own wife, Daneen, told police that her husband had given her very little attention or support in the wake of the death of their son. In fact, she said Ronald didn't seem to be affected at all. He actually was in pretty good spirits. The only person who described Ronald experiencing any sadness after the tragic death of his young son was Ronald's own father, Walter O'Brien, who claimed that Ronald was a good father who loved his children very much, and he was grief-stricken. Ronald was grief-stricken, according to his father. But I mean, it's his father, so what else is he gonna say? Stand by your man. Once law enforcement followed the money, they brought Ronald O'Brien in for an interview, and they asked him about the insurance policies. Initially, he seemed shocked that they even knew about the policies, and then he lied or omitted. The police said he lied. I think it's an omission. Ronald said he had purchased some insurance policies, but it had been the previous January, and he failed to make mention of the newest and more expensive policies purchased just weeks before he handed his 2 children cyanide-laced pixie sticks. Which is so stupid because it's like, if they know about the older ones, they're probably going to find out about the newer ones. Because they're the police, it's like their job to investigate. They clearly already suspect you, or they wouldn't be asking you these questions. They're gonna find the new insurance policies, and then it's gonna look suspicious that you lied about it. Ronald O'Brien failed a polygraph exam on November 5th. He was promptly arrested and charged with the murder of his son. Not just because he failed the polygraph exam. I'm sorry that I made it sound that way. He wasn't just like, I failed the polygraph, and they were like, you're under arrest, slap the cuffs on. That's all the evidence we need. Obviously, as I've told you, the insurance policies and things like that, stuff they found in his house, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that all led to them arresting him. So Ronald was charged with the capital murder of his son Timmy, but not only that, he was charged with the attempted murder of his daughter Elizabeth, who was only 5, and the 3 other children that he had knowingly given poison to. It was the belief of the police and the prosecutor, Mike Hinton, that Ronald only needed to kill his 2 children in order to get the money from their life insurance policies, but he wanted the other 3 to die as well, so that it would look as if the poisonings were the work of some child-hating madman and not targeted specifically at Ronald's 2 children. Now, this may seem like common sense, and it is, but think about how truly depraved and psychopathic that is. In order to get money to pay off debts that you racked up because you were irresponsible and you couldn't hold a job, you're willing to take the lives of 5 innocent children. And 2 of those children are your own. The other 3 didn't even have anything to do with it besides being a cover for his plot. I don't think it gets much lower than that. I'm sure it gets close, but it doesn't get much lower than that. This guy was evil. More evil than any villain or monster I've ever seen on my television set. So Ronald O'Brien, he's caught, right? His back's to the wall. They're like, we have all this evidence on you. This is clear what your motive was. What's up? And he was like, no, you're wrong. I didn't do this. Ronald O'Brien pleaded not guilty. He insisted that he was being wrongly accused and that the police were focused on him and there was still a crazy person out there on the loose poisoning pixie sticks. Ronald O'Brien would shout his innocence from the rooftops for his entire life. He never confessed. He never took ownership or an ounce of accountability for what he did. He never apologized to Jim Bates, his friend from church who trusted him, who literally brought him into his home. He never apologized to his wife, Dayneen, or his daughter, Elizabeth, for taking away Timmy. He just kept saying he didn't do it. He didn't do it. I mean, I suppose you do miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? After his arrest, the police found a pocket knife in Ronald O'Brien's house with traces of potassium cyanide on it, as well as scissors with plastic residue similar to that of the straw that made up the pixie stick packaging. So basically, they're saying, like, he cut the pixie stick, the plastic straw, with the scissors, and then he took the pocket knife, put the cyanide like granules on the tip of that, and then kind of like funneled it in that way. But they never found any actual cyanide, and they were never able to prove how Ronald O'Brien was able to procure this chemical. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. There were two people that Ronald worked with at Texas State Optical who had some nice things to say about him, and in the interest of fairness, I will tell you what they said. Ronald Evans, an optician and a coworker of Ronald O'Brien's, he said that O'Brien was really great with customers, especially his child customers. Ronald Evans said, quote, he always had a little treat for them. He would buy bubblegum or candy to give to them, end quote. I'm sure that Ronald Evans was just trying to help, but in the wake of what it seems Ronald O'Brien did to his own children and other innocent children, I don't know if I would be using his tendency to give kids candy as a positive character reference. He loved giving his children customers little bits of candy here and there. He's the candy man. Ronald Evans also mentioned that Ronald O'Brien enjoyed a debate like no one else, and he would often get into these heated debates with his coworkers where he would go to great lengths to prove that he was right. Ronald Evans even mentioned that one such debate happened to be about cyanide poisoning, and it had lasted for more than a week that October. In such debates, it was not unusual for Ronald O'Brien to get on the phone and call like people or experts who, knew what they were talking about in the certain field that Ronald was, trying to prove he was right in. So if they were arguing about like ocean currents, he would call like a marine biologist or an oceanographer or something at the local community college and get their input on it. And this is actually what he had done with the cyanide poisoning debate. I'm also going to come back to that in a moment. Now, there was one other person who claimed Ronald was a great guy who loved his family. When I say one other person, I mean like besides his parents, his father and mother, because obviously, like I said, stand by your man. This other person, her name was Kay Oliver, and she was the 17-year-old daughter of the owners of the Texas Optical office where Ronald worked. Kay said that Ronald talked about his kids and how much he loved them all the time, and he was the nicest guy. In fact, on the day of Halloween, Ronald ran out in the rain and pulled his car up to the covered walkway outside the office so that he could give Kay a ride to her car and she wouldn't have to get wet. I know that this was the 70s, and I know that she was 17, but I'm going to have to call Kay Oliver out here a little bit because this is the bare minimum, okay? Just because a guy gives you a ride to your car so that you don't get wet doesn't mean he's like Superman or even Clark Kent, all right? It doesn't mean he's a good guy. It just means like he needs something from you, or he's trying to get in his good graces, or maybe he is a good guy, but I'm going to need some other supporting evidence before I use that one anecdote to say like, oh, forget about the poisoning thing. Forget about all the evidence stacked up against him. Forget about the debts and the fact that he literally bought insurance policies so that he could kill his kids and pay off his debts. We're going to forget about all of that because now that I know he gives young women rides to their car so that they don't get wet, he's a good guy. Case dismissed. I mean, I feel like at this point his lawyers were just so desperate. They were like trawling for anybody who would make him look better. And they were like, this is a lame story, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so remember I said that the police were not able to figure out how Ronald O'Brien got potassium cyanide. Although there are many commercial uses for the chemical, it's not really easy to just walk in and buy some, as like your average Joe or Jill off the street, because it's a dangerous chemical. Potassium cyanide is used commercially for fumigation and electroplating, which is basically metal cleaning. And an optician employed at Texas State Optical named Albert Brinkley, he testified that Ronald had asked him about obtaining potassium cyanide. He said, quote, "The question was asked by O'Brien where the chemical was available. He said he wanted it for polishing some gold frames. I replied, I didn't know where it was available or if you could even buy it." End quote. Albert Brinkley also claimed that Ronald had expressed interest in stocking the chemical in the office because it could be used to clean the metal frames for glasses, eyeglasses. And Albert told Ronald that, yes, this was true. The chemical had been used to clean optical equipment in the 1950s, but since then, they'd abandoned potassium cyanide for more efficient and less dangerous cleaning methods, ones that won't kill you. Additionally, the police spoke to a chemistry professor at a local community college where Ronald had been taking night classes, and Ronald had asked his professor if cyanide was the most lethal type of poison or was another type of poison more lethal. When the professor told him that cyanide was pretty lethal, Ronald asked, how much do you think it would take to kill a person? Now, obviously, red flag, this is a strange question to ask, but I suppose in an academic situation, it might appear that Ronald O'Brien was just curious and trying to learn. However, I will say that I definitely think all of these things would have been red flags for a different person because Ronald O'Brien was an upstanding citizen and a devout Christian, a contributing member to his community and society. He also had this very soft, almost feminine voice is how it was described. And let's be honest here, women have more pleasing and more trustworthy voices than men. This is science. I'm not making this stuff up. This has actually been proven in scientific studies. So, for an example, I like plants and flowers. Oleander is a beautiful flower, a beautiful plant, very fragrant smelling, just a very, aesthetically pleasing flower. But it's one of the most poisonous plants on the earth. If you or your pet would accidentally eat it or ingest it, it can cause all sorts of issues, coma, death, things like that. Even just touching it can cause abrasions and burns and rashes on people's skin. So Ronald O'Brien sort of gave this appearance and this persona of being soft-spoken and not a threat. And I think because of that, maybe the red flags went off, but people were like, oh, it can't be. Not Ronald O'Brien. He's such a nice guy. He's so white. And that's a joke, kind of. But I mean, yeah, he's kind of boring. He kind of just is flavorless. He doesn't do anything. He goes to work, he goes home, he wakes up, he does it all again the next day. You wouldn't look at somebody like that and think this is, a person who is capable, not only capable, but willing to murder 5 children for less than $100,000. There was also an employee at a chemical store who recalled that Ronald O'Brien had walked in to the store one night in late October, right before closing time. Ronald was wearing a blue smock, which is the uniform that he wore for his job at Texas State Optical, and he asked if the store stocked potassium cyanide. The clerk, whose name was David Lee Jackson, he told Ronald that they did have that chemical, but when Ronald asked about sizing and prices, he seemed deterred. According to David Lee Jackson, the smallest volume of potassium cyanide available at that time was 5 pounds, and it would run Ronald about $50. Jackson recommended other companies that might have smaller volumes available and even gave different options for chemicals that would perform, like the potassium cyanide, and Ronald O'Brien left without purchasing anything. Now, Ronald's lawyers would use this fact as reasonable doubt, because if Ronald had used this potassium cyanide to, lace pixie sticks, where did he get it from? Where did he buy it from? And if the smallest amount he could buy was 5 pounds, where was the rest of it? Now, in my opinion, he could have bought it anywhere. He worked at Texas State Optical. He was soft-spoken. Like I said, he appeared to be harmless. And he may have walked into that chemical supply store wearing his optician's smock so that it appeared he was seeking the chemical for a professional purpose. He could have walked into another chemical supply shop that this guy gave the name of, and he could have said, hey, I work for Texas State Optical. We're actually looking to bring potassium cyanide back into our business to clean, metal frames, and I would really like to use you as our sole provider of this. We got a big company, we got lots of customers, so it's going to be big orders. You're going to make a lot of money, but first I need a sample of your potassium cyanide to make sure that it's going to be effective and work for our purposes. And then you're my guy. You're going to be the one that I come to for all my potassium cyanide needs. He could have gone to a different state. He could have gone to a different city. He could have done a million things. And to be honest, I looked up how easy it is to get today, potassium cyanide, and it's shockingly easy. So remember earlier I was like, you couldn't just walk in off the street and buy it? I guess you could if you seemed legitimate and if you seemed like you had a purpose for it and if you seemed harmless and not like a mass murderer. Because my train of thought is, if it's this easy to get it today, I feel like it would have been way easier in the 70s because there was less regulations, there wasn't a lot of electronic record keeping, and they asked fewer questions back then. I mean, people were far less nosy back in the day. What's also terrifying to me is how many people online seem to want to buy it, today, with very specific questions being asked in message boards like, how can I get cyanide pills? Where do you hide a cyanide capsule in your mouth? And where can I buy cyanide in Johannesburg? Glad I'm not there because there's a person trying to buy cyanide over there. So not going to go there. I was very disturbed by that, actually. If you go on, mad people be trying to buy cyanide. Why? What's going on out in the world? Let's move on. Like I said, Ronald O'Brien could have gotten it a million different ways, if I'm being honest. And I guarantee you that he probably got it from someone who wasn't supposed to sell it to him or give it to him. Like I said, they may have given him a sample if they think that he's going to bring business to their store. So that person probably wasn't going to come out in the wake of what had happened to little Timmy and basically throw their hat in the ring for who was responsible for that child dying. They don't want to be connected to it. They would probably lose their job if they're not the owner of the chemical supply store, if they're just a manager or just working there. And they made this decision to help Ronald O'Brien out, to give him a sample enough to poison pixie sticks, but not too much where he would have all this additional left over. I believe that Ronald O'Brien used every ounce of potassium cyanide that he had in those pixie sticks. And I do believe that when he said he was going to his car before going back into the Bates house, that's when he cut them open and did the whole swapping over thing. Because I guarantee you when he first showed the pixie sticks, they probably hadn't been tampered with when he got them from trick-or-treating probably hadn't been tampered with yet because he wouldn't want, Jim Bates to see that they were like stapled together and everything. He would want to make sure that by the time they were tampered with, he was handing them directly to the kids. It was the end of the night. Jim Bates is not going to look at this candy at this point. He's moving on. He's moving on with his day and night because Halloween is over as soon as you get back from trick-or-treating. You know what I mean? That really has always bothered me, and that's why I'm talking about it so much, and that's why I'm spending so much time thinking about it, because I even found myself saying, like, was there a chance he was wrongly convicted? But then I was like, shut up, Stephanie. Like, stop it. This is not the time to try and be fair, because this dude was a psychopath, and there's definitely no way in hell he was innocent. I truly don't believe that he was. But there was a part of me where I was like, well, they didn't find the cyanide and they couldn't prove where he bought it from. But come on, man. If someone wants something enough, they will get it. So they couldn't prove that he physically ever had the cyanide. But, like I said, it was on the knife in his house. And with everything else stacking up against him, did they really need to be able to prove where he had gotten it from? A jury didn't think so. On June 3rd, 1975, it took just 46 minutes for a jury to return a guilty verdict for 1 charge of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. It was then decided that Ronald O'Brien would be put to death in the electric chair. This was a huge win for Harris County prosecutor Mike Hinton, who fought every step of the way to make sure that Ronald O'Brien would pay for his terrible crimes. And Mike Hinton remembered how much Ronald O'Brien vexed him during the trial. He was always hamming it up for the cameras, proclaiming to be an innocent victim, a father still in mourning that was being targeted by the police. And Ronald O'Brien was also sort of messing with Mike Hinton behind the scenes, kind of giving him little glances, little smiles, little winks. And Hinton remembered one day the Candyman, which is what everyone started calling Ronald O'Brien. He handed him a Tootsie Roll in court. It's not funny, but it's like bizarre and kind of funny. Like, can you imagine? This guy loves getting candy out to his kid customers. He's poisoning kids on Halloween, and now he's trying to give a piece of candy to the guy who's prosecuting him. It's kind of like a veiled threat, definitely is. Definitely Ronald O'Brien was messing with Mike Hinton, which, at least he still got a sense of humor. Although Ronald O'Brien and his lawyers appealed his conviction several times, he was not saved from death, although he was saved from the electric chair, which is sad because if there was one person I'd want to see fry in the electric chair, it'd be Ronald O'Brien. On March 31st, 1984, Ronald Clark O'Brien was executed by lethal injection. He was declared dead at 12:48 a.m., and when word of his death reached a large group of 300 people who had gathered outside of Huntsville prison, everyone cheered. They yelled, "Trick or treat!" and they threw candy at the anti-death penalty protesters. Once again, not funny, but also it's funny. Just seeing it in my head, playing out almost like a movie, like these people cheering on one side and these like anti-death penalty protesters on the other side, which is like, why are you there? Why are you there? Okay? This is like disrespectful. A child's dead. I get it if you don't like the death penalty. I completely understand. No one likes the death penalty, but like, you should have just let that guy go. Okay? He's not who you want on your team. He's not your poster boy. Let him go. But then I see like these people who are happy that he's dead, like just chucking candy across the way at the anti-death penalty protesters, and they're like using their picket signs to like block the candy. The Tootsie Rolls are flying. It's like boom, boom, boom. That's what I saw in my head. Until the moment his heart stopped beating, Ronald O'Brien claimed he was innocent. And as he was strapped to the table, he said, quote, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death," end quote. That's big of you, Ronald. It's really big of you. Actually, you need to be seeking forgiveness from other people, not offering it. A little turned around, but okay. Many people who didn't even believe in the death penalty, they still believe that O'Brien should have gotten it, or at the very least, never gotten out of prison again. His lawyers argued that he was innocent, but they later also said they felt he could have been rehabilitated. But as Mike Hinton put it, who was the prosecutor, if Ronald O'Brien was willing to kill his own 2 children without a second thought, was anyone around him really safe? During one of his appeals, Ronald's lawyer, Martin Teague, gave his opening statement in court, and he said, quote, "As you know, my client was convicted of killing Harloween," end quote. It may seem like a cheeky statement, and it was most likely meant to be a cheeky statement, kind of like you guys are overblowing this, like you're blowing it out of proportion, so dramatic. Everyone made it seem like it was so much bigger a deal than it was. Like Ronald, my client, didn't just like kill an entire holiday, because people were saying that, like Candyman killed Halloween for everybody. These words rang true to the community. The people in that area felt that Ronald O'Brien had killed Halloween. Tom Campbell was a young man in 1974. He was a news reporter for a local Houston television station, and he was assigned to cover the trial. He's since left Houston and Texas behind, but he's not been able to run from the terror of what happened to Timmy O'Brien. He said, quote, "To this day, I don't observe Halloween," end quote. He was telling a story in a paper, and he said even, at the new place he works at, which I believe is another paper or some media thing, they would have Halloween parties, and he would kind of stay until the festivities got going and everybody was distracted, and then he would slip out. He just can't think about Halloween without thinking about Timmy O'Brien. And that makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of people in that area, the Pasadena area, and even the Houston area in general, they did not want to celebrate Halloween for a long time after that. Were they afraid of getting poison candy while they trick-or-treated? Maybe, but it's more likely that the thought of little Timmy going out, dressed in his costume with an empty bag he hoped would soon be filled with delicious candy, buzzing with the excitement that Halloween night puts into a person, only to have his life taken by the one person he should have been able to trust the most. It may have been too much to think that Halloween could just go on as it always had. And I think for a lot of people there, it was difficult for them to celebrate Halloween without thinking about Timmy, which is sweet and sad. So that is the conclusion of our first 2022 Harloween video. What did you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments section. I really appreciate you all being here. Go into the description box for links to Magellan TV, to my social media, Instagram and Twitter, to my coffee company, Criminal Coffee Company, best coffee you will ever have. I mean, if you come trick-or-treating to my house, you're getting a bag of Criminal coffee, kids. Make sure to follow my podcast, Crime Weekly, that I co-host every week with retired police detective Derek Levasseur. Links to the podcast as well as the YouTube channel are also in the description box. Share the video if you thought it was worth sharing, like it if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I have a lot of great stuff planned for you this month. Happy Harloween. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and stay spooky, and I'll see you very, very soon.